Hello, this is Claus Jensen and welcome to my new video series called The Nimzowitsch Files. As you surely have guessed already, this is a series on Aron Nimzowitsch, who was not only a very successful chess player, but perhaps more importantly, one of the great thinkers of modern chess history. He is now widely acknowledged as one of the leading theoreticians of the so-called hypermodern school. And when he published his revolutionary book My System in 1925, he was not only on top of his career, but also theoretically the most important player of his time. His contemporaries didn't always see it that way, however. Nimzowitsch was somehow regarded the black sheep in the crowd of world-class players, and it was not until many years later that his ideas were finally fully appreciated by a wider audience. Aron Nimzowitsch was born in the Latvian capital Riga in 1886, and he died in Copenhagen, Denmark in 1935, after having lived his last 15 years in Denmark. And on his death, Alekhine was quoted, "It's needless to say the chess world suffered a great loss with the death of Nimzowitsch. I would also like to add the greatest loss, because Nimzowitsch was not only one of the greatest artistic players, but before all, the first to open new paths for scientific chess, and this is why his name will never be forgotten amongst chess players all over the world." End of quote. And Nimzowicz's contributions to chess are indeed countless. He has two black opening defenses named after him. The Nimzo Indian against d4, it's d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, which is the most popular answer to one d4 even today. And he also has the Nimzowitsch defense named after him, e4, knight c6, which is much less popular. Both these openings are based on the principle that the center is not only defined by the pawns. The hypermodern thinking of using the pieces to define center play was very much developed by Nimzowitsch. And also his ideas on prophylaxis, overprotection, the blockade, the threat is stronger than its execution, those are still essential to chess players of today, even though it's almost 100 years since they were published by Nimzowitsch. I plan to do quite a few videos on Nimzowicz's games, and this is the first one, played in 1904. So Nimzo was aged 18 at this point and is playing white against Hilse, and we have a Vienna game starting e4, e5, knight c3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, d3, d6, and now the young Nimzowitsch plays a very aggressive move, but not a very good one, f4. I think the simplest way for black to react could be bishop takes, rook takes, queen h4 check, and so on, with a good play for black. But Hilse played knight f6, and then f5 from Nimzowitsch, shutting down the bishop on c8 and preparing bishop g5, which could be an annoying pin for Hilse. So Hilse played h6 here, and with g4, the young Nimzowitsch is playing very aggressively and very unlike his positional style he practiced when he matured as a chess player. Knight a5, queen f3, exchange on c4, c6 from Hilse, bishop d2, a6, castling queenside, b5, knight g to e2, and on this and the following moves, Nimzo ignores the hanging c4 pawn. Bishop b7, h4, and it's a very sharp game already, and black is yet to find safety for his king. And of course he cannot castle here. This would be castling into it g5. So instead he plays queen e7, and g5 came anyway, knight d7, and knight g3, and now the threat from Nimzowitsch is f6 followed by knight f5. For example, queenside castle now, then f6, g takes, knight f5, and then there's problems here on h6. So instead of castling, Hilse plays f6 himself, and then bishop e3, and perhaps now was the last chance of getting his king to safety. Hilse could have castled right away here, or he could have exchanged on e3 first and then castle, or he could also exchange on g5 first, and then castle. But he didn't castle here. He played b takes c4, and then came queen h5 check. And now black has to give up his castling. He could play queen f7 here, but this would give white an advantage after bishop takes c5, and then there will be problems on d6 and perhaps also on g7 f6 after a queen exchange. And king f8 would lead to an exchange on c5 and on f6, and then a rook in the g file, and the black king is vulnerable here. So white would have an advantage. So it was right to play king d8, but of course now this castling right is no longer there for black. Bishop takes c5, knight takes c5, queen e2, and now the obvious move for black was king c7, but instead black played king e8, which doesn't make much sense, and it's only spending too much time. G takes f6, g takes f6, and Nimzo grabs the pawn on c4. Then comes a5 with the threat bishop a6. Nimzo goes back with the queen, and now black plays king d7, rook h2, rook a to g8, queen e3. Now the threat is to take on c5 because there's a pin on the pawn on d6. So now black finally brings his king to safety, but not without spending a lot of time. Rook h to d2, rook g8, and no doubt Nimzo is having a small advantage here, but black's position seems to be quite solid, and it's not that easy to find a way through for white. But what he did try here was knight h5, and could be threatening to create an entry square on g7, so the knight better be chased away immediately. So queen f7 from Hilse. Knight has to go back, and now I think Hilse could have tried queen e7, provoking Nimzowitsch to find another way through, but he didn't. He played h5 instead. Then came rook g2 and rook d to g8. And what to do next? The position seems quite locked, and Nimzowitsch realized here that he had to take more violent measures to create imbalances in this position. And the move he played was very surprising and a very interesting one, and certainly not one Hilse could have expected. And the move here was rook takes d6. And one idea is that if rook takes g3 here, then knight b5 check, take the knight, then queen takes c5, king b8, rook takes g3, and white is having a winning position. Now he's an exchange up, and he has some dangerous attack on the black king. So Hilse had to take on d6, and then rook d2 check, king c7, queen takes c5. And now Nimzo has sacked the exchange, and now his knight is hanging as well, but this is a small trap, because if Hilse had taken the knight, then knight b5 check, and then queen a7 check, and knight d6 check, and the black queen is lost. So of course black couldn't take on g3, and he didn't. He played king b8 instead. Then came queen d6 check, king a8, and after knight g to e2, it's time to evaluate. And Nimzo has a knight and a pawn for the rook, and perhaps he can grab another pawn, the a pawn, very soon. And is this enough? Well, since Nimzowitsch has a long-lasting pressure against the vulnerable black king, the answer could possibly be that yes, Nimzowitsch has enough compensation for the exchange. Rook g8 followed, queen c5. Rook takes d2, and the in-between move, queen a5 check, and then taking back the rook, queen d7 check, king c1, and rook g8. Now b4 comes, because white wants to advance his queenside pawns, and is also giving the white king an escape route on b2 if necessary. Queen c7. Nimzowitsch doesn't want to exchange queens here. Rook g8 and a4. And now we have a very double-edged position, and a very interesting position, because what white wants to do is to push his queenside pawns and possibly uses knights as attacking pieces as well. So clearly white is playing on the queen side. And black would like to create counterplay on the king side. And the most obvious way to do this is to try to grab the h4 pawn and create a pass pawn in the h-file. This would be good counterplay for black. So in the next sequence of moves, black would always consider playing rook g4. And he would consider it already here. Rook g4 is a possible move. But then Nimzowitsch would have queen f8 check. And then the f6 pawn would fall. And then it's suddenly white who has a pass pawn in the f-file. And he is also defending the pawn on h4. So this would be very good for white. So rook g4 is not possible here. So queen d8 came instead, defending the pawn on f6. b5 from Nimzo. C takes, queen takes. And now again, rook g4. Is it possible here? Well, in this position, I think, well, a5 is a move. King a7 and queen c5 check, king b8 is very sharp and also unclear who is better here. It's very hard to judge. So it was possible perhaps to play rook g4 here. But Hilse played king a8. Queen c5 came. And now it seems that rook g4 is perhaps possible now, because now knight b5, king b8, queen a7 check, king c8. It could look as if white has no better than a perpetual check, but he has a very strong move in this position, and the move is rook e to c3. And now white has some very dangerous attack, and black cannot afford to take the on h4 here. But he could perhaps try bishop takes e4 instead, but then knight takes, rook takes, and then there's this nasty check on a8, winning the rook. So rook g4 is very dangerous for black here, and Hilse played rook g7 instead. King b2 came from Nimzowitsch, and now again rook g4 is again met by this knight e to c3. Same position as in the previous line. So king b8 was played, knight c1, Nimzowitsch, and here rook g4. Let's examine this move once again. Queen b4 from white, rook takes h4, and knight b3 is still dangerous for black. As a knight can go to a5, the bishop is pinned to the king, and this is still looking dangerous for black. So perhaps wisely enough, Hilse chose to put the rook on the much more defensive square c7. Then came queen b5 and king c8. And in the last sequence of moves, 10 moves or so, 12 moves, it's quite interesting to see that black has not been able to improve his position. He had some opportunities to play rook g4, but it was never certain that it would succeed. And he has only been he has been forced, so to speak, to move his king back and forth. And but while white has improved his position slightly, he has moved the a pawn, he has exchanged the b pawns, and now his knights are slowly moving in. And with knight b3, they are surely moving closer to the enemy pieces. Queen d7, queen e2, and now Hilse defends the h5 pawn, and then comes knight b5. And now starts a series of attacks from the white knights. And the rook, queen c4 here. That doesn't work. Obvious fork here on d6. So rook d7 was played. And then knight c5 attacking the rook once again. Rook g8. Knight e6, another attack on the rook. Rook back to d7. Queen c4 check. King b8. And in this position, Nimzowitsch plays a beautiful move, which illustrates the combined power of his knights very nicely. He plays knight c5. And the idea here is that queen takes c4 doesn't work, although the queen is simply hanging here, because then comes knight takes d7 with check, and when the king goes to a8 or c8, then there's this lethal fork on b6, winning the black queen and the game. So after knight c5, Hilse played rook e7. But then Nimzowitsch could simply simplify into a winning endgame. Queen takes f7, rook takes, knight d6, rook g7, and now taking the bishop here, and of course black cannot take the knight since the resulting pawn endgame after rook takes b7 is a very easy task for white to win. So he has to play rook g4, and then knight c5, rook takes h4, and Hilse has finally created this pass pawn in the h-file, but now it's too late because Nimzowitsch is in control. Knight d3, rook g4, and now comes a very important move, knight e8, because white needs to create a pass pawn immediately. And if now h4, then knight takes f6, rook goes somewhere, knight takes the other pawn, h3, and then white has this knight f to g4, and white is completely winning. So instead Hilse took the pawn on e4, then came knight takes f6, rook takes a4, and with knight takes h5 it's all over, because the two knights can support the white passer in the f-file, while the black rook is overworked since it has to support its own pawn in the e-file and at the same time stop the white pawn, and this is an impossible task for the rook. So for example, rook h4 here, knight g3, e4, knight e5, and then the white can start marching his pawn, or as happened in the game, e4 from Hilse, f6, and here e takes d3 doesn't work, because then simply f7, and the black rook cannot go to f4, so the white pawn queens, and therefore rook a5 was necessary, and then came f7 and rook f5, knight e5, e3, and now f8 queening would be premature because rook takes, knight fork, takes the rook, and then e2, and then it's all of a sudden black who's slightly better because he is now queening. But so f8 queening isn't the right move. The correct move, the accurate move is knight g3, and that was the move that Nimzowitsch played in the game. And now the threat of queening on f8 is in effect, and white is winning the game. And Hilse saw all this and resigned the game in this position. So I hope you enjoyed this first display of Nimzowitsch playing a nice game at the age of 18. And as I said in the earlier in the video, I'm planning to do quite a lot of videos on Nimzowitsch games all through his career. So I'm looking forward to many more videos on his games, and I hope you're looking forward to them as well. And meanwhile, you should be welcome to visit my chess website at klausjensen.com. Bye bye for now.